Hello everyone, and welcome to this short video tutorial in which we're going to be looking at whether you can recognise the actus reus and the mens rea of a number of given criminal offences. And this is a really good task for you to do to revise the actus reus and mens rea of a crime when you're looking at criminal law. It's a nice introductory activity and it will just help you to check that you do understand actus reus and mens rea and that you're able to spot those within the definitions of some laws that you'll need to know as part of your studies. So in the following slides, I'll be asking you to identify the actus reus and the mens rea in some definitions, and once I've given you a chance to do that, I will give you an answer slide as well so that you can check your answers. Just as a little reminder then, you need to know what actus reus and mens rea are. So this little diagram, just a quick refresher. The actus reus is Latin and it stands for the guilty act, or the actual physical thing, if you like, that the defendant has to do. And the mens rea is the mental element of a criminal offence. Remember that most criminal offences require the actus reus and the mens rea before you'll have a crime. The reason I say most is if you've watched my video tutorial on strict liability offences, you'll know that there are some crimes where you don't need the mens rea. You're guilty through just doing the physical act. But most of the time you need to have both. And that's really important because that's what helps us differentiate between something that's an accident and something that's an actual criminal offence. And it's that mens rea element that's sometimes the trickiest bit to identify in the definitions. So let's have a look at some examples of this then. So let's start by looking at murder as an example for us to work with here. So murder is a common law offence and it was defined by Lord Coke in 1797 in the following way. So he said that murder is the killing of a reasonable creature in being under the king's peace with malice aforethought, express or implied. And because of the date that this definition was provided for us, the language is quite old-fashioned, and again that can be quite challenging when you're looking at law for you to be able to work out what the actus reus is. So what's the physical thing your defendant has to do, and also what's the mental element, what state of mind do they need to possess in order to be guilty of that offence. Remember that I do have a separate video tutorial which goes through all of the law on murder. It looks at the cases, it breaks down the definition and looks at exactly what you need to find your defendant guilty of a crime. But in this video, what I'd like you to do, and I'll give you a second to do it, is just to try and identify from this definition which words indicate the actus reus and which words indicate the mens rea. And it might be useful for you to note this definition down and use two different coloured highlighters, because on my next slide, on the answer slide, I'll highlight the actus reus in yellow and the mens rea in red so that you can check your answer. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. Okay, so hopefully you have your answer in front of you, and I'm hoping that you've got a highlighted answer that looks like this. So in yellow, I've highlighted the actus reus, or the physical act that the defendant has to do to be guilty, and I've highlighted in red the mens rea, or the mental element or state of mind that our defendant needs to have. So the actus reus for murder is the killing of a reasonable creature in being under the king's peace. And the reason we know that's the actus reus is because it's telling us the physical actions that have to have been carried out. So there must have been a killing, and reasonable creature in being, again that's old-fashioned language, but we need to have the killing of a human being, and it has to be under the king's peace, i.e. not in wartime. And then in red, we've got the mens rea element. Our defendant has to have malice aforethought, express or implied. And remember that this mens rea is a bit unusual for murder, this express or implied. Lots of the general public perhaps don't realise this about murder, but you can be guilty of murder if you intend to kill or if you intend to do GBH and then your victim subsequently dies. Okay, so that's the actus reus and mens rea of murder. Let's take a look at another crime. So our next offence that we're going to consider is a property offence, and it's the offence of theft, which is set out under Section 1 of the Theft Act 1968. So unlike murder, which we just looked at, murder is a common law offence, and we've got our definition from Lord Coke. The definition of theft actually comes from an Act of Parliament, from the Theft Act, and that's what the definition is. And again, I do have a separate video tutorial on theft if you need a refresher on that. But for the purposes of this video, I'd like you to take a look at this definition. And again, you might want to pause the video here so that you can highlight what you think the actus reus and the mens rea is. So the definition that we have is that a person is guilty of theft if he dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. So I'll give you a second to think about your answers there. Okay, so here's the answer slide then, and again I've done the actus reus in yellow and the mens reus in red. And this time you can see just from the pattern of the highlighting that the mens rea is separate. It happens in two separate sections of this definition. So you won't always get all of the mens rea together and all of the actus reus together. Sometimes they can be slightly separate, like we've got here. So our actus reus, or our physical actions that we need our defendant to have completed, there's actually three elements to it. So for the actus reus, we need an appropriation of property that belongs to another. And you can see that the mens rea is that the defendant must have dishonestly appropriated that property, and also he must have had the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. So of course, if he thinks he's borrowing it and he plans to give it back, he wouldn't meet that element of the mens rea there. Okay, so let's take a look at our next offence. So the next crime that we're going to consider is battery. And battery is one of our non-fatal offences against the person. And I've got a number of different videos on the 5 non-fatal offences, which you can take a look at if you need some revision on those. The non-fatal offences encompass a range of different offences where a person is caused some sort of level of harm by the defendant, but the harm doesn't result in their death, hence non-fatal. So battery is one of the lower level non-fatal offences against the person. And again, it's a common law offence. It is charged under the Criminal Justice Act, but it is a common law offence, meaning that we get our definition from the common law. So our definition is the application of unlawful force with intentional recklessness as to whether unlawful force is applied. So once again, I'm just going to give you a moment to get your highlighters out, get your notes out, and try and identify the actus reus and the mens rea here. So here's our answer then. Once again, actus reus in yellow, mens rea in red. So the actus reus is the application of unlawful force. And remember that for battery, the application of unlawful force can actually be the slightest touch. Notice that the actus reus doesn't say that we need to have a high level of force. The slightest touch, touching the victim's clothing, an unwanted kiss, that could all amount to a battery. Notice the word unlawful. because some touchings will be lawful, such as force that's used in self-defence, for example, or if you've got implied consent, or there's some sort of, if you bump into someone on a busy train, that will be classed as the ordinary jostlings of everyday life, Wilson and Pringle. So in that instance, there'd be implied consent, it wouldn't be unlawful touching. So that's telling us about the physical action that we need the defendant to have committed in order to be guilty of this offence. And notice that the mens rea, there are actually two options here, intention or recklessness. So our defendant either intends to apply the unlawful force, so if you slap someone or you punch someone, you've got intention to do that, but it might be recklessness. So it might be that you're resisting arrest and you're just randomly flailing your arms out, and in that case you don't intend to apply the force, but you'd have been reckless, you've taken an unjustified risk as to whether you applied the force. Okay, so that's battery. Let's take a look at another offence. So the next offence that we're going to consider is an attempt, or a criminal attempt. And this is another example of a definition that comes from an Act of Parliament. So attempts come under the Criminal Attempts Act 1981. Once again, I do have a separate video tutorial that goes through all of the law on attempts. So this is the definition that we have from the Criminal Attempts Act under section 1. And the definition says, if with intent to commit an offence, a person does an act which is more than merely preparatory to the commission of an offence, he is guilty of attempting to commit the offence. Sounds a bit waffly, that one. So I'll give you a second once again just to jot it down or to note down what you think the actus reus and the mens rea are from that definition. Okay, so here's our answer then. So mens rea in red, actus reus in yellow. So if with intent to commit an offence, so our mens rea that our defendant has to have is that they must intend to commit a particular crime. And it can be a number of different crimes that they're intending to commit, but they must have intention, they want to carry it out. Obviously, just having the intention is not enough. Remember that we need actus reus and mens rea, usually for a crime. So you might intend to commit an offence, but you can plan it in your head, in your mind, all you like. It's not until you actually start to act upon it are you going to meet the actus reus as well, and therefore then meet two elements that we need for a criminal attempt. So the actus reus is that our defendant, once they've intended to commit an offence, they've then done an act which is more than merely preparatory to the commission of an offence. And if you've watched my previous video tutorials on this area of law, you'll know that this phrase, more than merely preparatory, has posed a significant number of problems for the courts and the judges over the years, because the judges have had to decide whether our defendants have done something that is more than merely preparatory, or in other words, they've done more than merely prepare to commit the offence. Some wording that we've got from other cases would include, have they embarked upon the crime proper? Have they actually started in some way to commit the offence? So they've got intention to commit an offence and they've done something that is more than merely preparatory. And the final offence that we're going to consider for this little revision video is wounding with intent under section 18 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. So this is another non-fatal offence against the person. We've already considered battery, which was a lower level criminal offence. Section 18, I hope you remember, is really, really serious, and it does carry up to a maximum of life in prison if you're guilty of a section 18. So much more serious than battery. Now, unlike battery, which is a common law offence, Section 18, hopefully you can guess this from the fact that we've got a section here, it is defined by an Act of Parliament. It's defined by the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. 1861, really old Act, so no surprise then that a lot of the language here is really antiquated, really old-fashioned, which again can pose a bit of a problem when you're trying to work out what is the physical thing that your defendant has to do and what is the state of mind that they need to possess. So I'll just read out this definition to you, and if you can note down what you think the Actus Reus is and the mens rea is, I'll then reveal it on the next slide. Okay, so section 18 says, whosoever shall unlawfully and maliciously by any means whatsoever wound or cause any grievous bodily harm to any person with intent to do some grievous bodily harm to any person, or with intent to resist or prevent the lawful apprehension or detainer of any person, shall be guilty of an offence. What a long sentence. So I'll give you a second just to think about that one. Okay, we've got our answer here, and you can see, as we've seen previously, our Actus Reus, which is yellow, comes in separate little blocks, if you like, and also the mens rea. We've got two different elements of mens rea that are slightly separate in our definition. So firstly, our defendant must have unlawfully done something. So this is an Actus Reus term. Unlawfully, remember, sometimes the physical action might be lawful. So for example, in self-defence, it might be lawful to apply some force. So that's an Actus Reus element. But then it says maliciously. Now maliciously is a bit of an old-fashioned word, but it is a mens rea word. So they've maliciously wounded or caused any grievous bodily harm to any person. So the first sort of proper Actus Reus element that we've got here is that they must have wounded or, and notice they don't have to do both, they've wounded or caused grievous bodily harm. So we're looking for a wound or GBH. A wound is a break in the continuity of the whole skin, and grievous bodily harm is really serious harm. And notice that they have to have maliciously and with intent done some grievous bodily harm. So this is high level mens rea. They are intending to do some grievous bodily harm. Recklessness isn't appearing here like it did with the lower level battery offence. They've intended to do some GBH. Or, and this is the slightly weird thing about section 18, or they've got intent to resist or prevent the lawful apprehension or detainer of any person. So this is the offence that we would use if they have resisted arrest and in so doing they've caused some GBH to a police officer. And of course that's going to be a very serious offence. So section 18, you could be looking at life in prison for that offence. Okay, so that's the last of the offences that I wanted to look at with you today. I hope you found this little revision activity useful, and if you're unfamiliar with any of the crimes that I've mentioned in this video, I would recommend you have a look at some of the other tutorials that I've got on the channel.